morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where in the world you're joining us from. Welcome to our expert panel, Building Smarter Enterprises with Agentic AI, Planning, Reasoning, and Contextual Memory, brought to you by our friends at Dataiku, Nexla, Alation, Zenlytic, Informatica, Galileo, and SAP. I'm Brian Mink, co-founder and president of Data Science Connect, the world's largest data and AI community. Today, we're excited to welcome hundreds of attendees from all over the world to discuss how Agentic AI goes beyond traditional automation by enabling systems to reason contextually, adapt to change, and act autonomously across complex workflows. Today, we'll explore the architectural foundations and key design principles, like memory retention, goal-directed planning, and natural language understanding that underpin intelligent agent behavior. We'll also discuss how to ensure these systems remain transparent and governable, with built-in mechanisms for oversight and explainability. And we'll talk with our panelists about how to ensure reliable, adaptive AI that can operate in the wild, responsibly, and at scale. We're honored to hear from a distinguished panel of experts today. Ryan Jansen, co-founder and CEO of Zenlytic, Amai Desai, Chief Technology Officer at Nexla, Jonathan Bruce, VP Strategic Customer Advocacy at Alation, and Christian Capdeville, Senior Director of Content and Product Marketing at Dataiku. Before we begin, a few housekeeping items. To make this feel a little more in person, we suggest you add a photo to your profile and include your bio, LinkedIn profile, and other information you want your fellow attendees to see. Next, please take advantage of the Q&A and chat features in the right sidebar. We'll be addressing your questions throughout the webinar, so be sure to upvote the questions you'd like the panel to address. If you're wondering where your organization stands compared to others on your AI journey, check out the poll questions in the right sidebar. And finally, to learn more about how to leverage Agentic AI in your AI journey, check out the calls to action below throughout the webinar from our sponsors. Now, without further ado, I'd like to welcome our panelists to the stage, and we'll kick things off. Welcome, guys. So we'll start with just some quick introductions. If you could each tell us who you are, what your current role is, and what you do within your current organizations. So I'll start with you in the order that you appear on my screens. So Amai, why don't you kick us off?
Hey everyone, this is Amai Desai. I'm Chief Technology Officer at Nexla. I lead our AI product as strategy as well, and very excited to talk about Agentic AI with all of you.
Excellent. Thanks, Amai. Jonathan?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Jonathan Booth, calling in from San Francisco Airport today. And I've been with Alation for 3 years. I'm field CTO, VP there. My job is all about helping our customers realize the true value of the technology, people, process that we have with our data. Back to you.
Thanks, Jonathan. Ryan?
Thanks, Brent. Hi, I'm Ryan Jansen. I'm the CEO of Zenlytic. Zenlytic is kind of like a scale-up business, and we make an AI agent ourselves. So we spend all our time thinking about AI agents, and that agent is an AI data analyst.
Excellent. And Christian?
Hey everybody, Christian Capdeville. I lead content and product marketing at Dataiku. Call ourselves the universal AI platform. So we work with a lot of large enterprises globally, rolling out everything from analytics to traditional machine learning models, all the way up to AI agents. And so we've helped our customers ship over 1,000 at this point Gen AI use cases, and in the process learned some common patterns and anti-patterns, which I'm excited to talk about today.
Outstanding. Well, welcome to all of you. Thanks for joining us. And thanks to everyone in the audience for joining us today. So I want to kick things off by just explaining to everyone in the audience a bit more about what Agentic AI is. It's been a very hot topic lately as Gen AI and as AI generally have become very profound topics within the enterprise. Agentic AI is kind of the next generation of what's coming. So if each of you could explain how you would define Agentic AI and what differentiates it from other traditional AI automation like rule-based or other Gen AI systems that might already exist. So I'll start with you in reverse order from the way we did introductions. So Christian, why don't you kick us off on that one?
Sure. Yeah, excited to hear how others approach this as well. But a simple way for us at Dataiku to think about how to define agents is that they're basically just LLM-powered systems that can take actions autonomously. And one easy way to think about it is in comparison to something that we understand very well, which is like Gen AI RAG chatbots. And so a RAG chatbot, you ask it a question, it gives you an answer. Agents are about what happens after that answer. So you want it to take some sort of action. You want it to do something. But really, even that definition is too simple, because what an agent is and does can kind of vary greatly depending on the complexity of the use case. So if you think about it as a spectrum of complexity, you have on like one side very simple RAG chatbot use cases. And on the far side, you might have very complex autonomous systems that can handle workflows like on their own without any prompting from a user. And what we've seen is that as our customers have gone from these simple use cases to these more mature use cases on the right, the level of complexity just scales really quickly, kind of surprisingly quickly.
Yeah, great points, Christian. Ryan, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's a tough question to answer, right? It's tough because agent has become several things, right? It's a user interface pattern, it's an AI architecture, and it's a marketing term, and people are using them interchangeably now. And actually, it's getting murkier as more and more things become agentic, right? This was, as it was, there was only a handful of agents a year ago at this time, but now I would argue that a lot of, even the foundation model implementations, if you're using OpenAI, O3 or something like that, that's a very agentic approach. They call it a reasoning model. But I think the definition for me, the trigger point, is the thermostat definition, which is basically like closed loop feedback. And at the start of my career, I was an electrical engineer, and I spent like 4 years studying closed loop feedback because it's such a powerful thing, right? And it's like the thermostat is, the way it works is like, it's like, hey, what's the temperature in this room? And it's like, oh, it's too hot. Okay, I'm going to turn on the air conditioning, or vice versa. And just that little bit of feedback makes pretty magical things happen, right? And it's like, this is what controls the autopilot in an airplane, or this is what made it possible to land on the moon, whatever it is, like in the 60s. Closed loop feedback has a wide range of applications, and it actually unlocks sort of like goal-seeking long-term behavior. And I think that's the best definition of what an agent is for me, which is you take a chatbot and you add a feedback loop onto it so it can evaluate its work. You close the loop on whether it's doing the job it's asked for and give it a chance to modify and adapt as it goes forward.
Yeah, very good points. And I think you hit on a good one, that there's lots of different technologies that may come under this umbrella of what we call agentic AI. So very interesting. Jonathan, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, sure. So from my perspective, it's about, well, the way in which I always seek to describe technology is getting it to a point where I can make it totally understandable. And the true measure of that is, can I explain it to my mother-in-law? My mother-in-law is in her 80s, doesn't understand technology, and I describe agents as a way in which you can do work, a way in which you can get work done in a highly contextual fashion. Now, if I speak of the context that I sit here at Relation, so much of that it's about, all of our customers have gotten to this point of, establishing an intelligence platform with their data, with the context they have, with an enterprise data catalog. So what they want to do is they want to make sure they can do a work around their most concrete and most precious asset. That's their data. That's the kind of I think the general kind of category to what we see that. And I think we'll get into this in more detail as we talk further. But I think the fact that you could now do that work in a more autonomous fashion, in a manner that is not necessarily constrained on the outcomes that you would typically see with more constrained workflows. I think that is the opportunity that I think is really the kind of the flywheel I think much of the industry is waking up to.
Yeah, autonomous, very, very good word that we'll, I'm sure, come back to. Amai?
Yeah, I would say my definition of agentic AI is fairly crisp: autonomous and agency. I think we are nowhere close to really having autonomous systems at the scale at which maybe we should be having. Everything else is kind of somewhere in the middle, whether that's a rule-based system with if this, then that, or deterministic LLM workflows. I think the closest analogy or closest parallel that I have is, I would say, the Tesla self-driving system, where there are levels. And right now, if you drive Tesla's FSD, it says FSD supervised. I think of agentic AI as more of LLM workflows that are supervised today, right now. It's kind of in the level 1, level 2 category. And there are like 3 more levels for us to actually get towards, which would have a massive unlock for where people are today.
Great points, Amai. So now I want to go to our next question. Agentic AI really involves goal-directed actions and reasoning. So one question is, how do you design AI agents that can autonomously plan and execute complex tasks, especially We're talking about dynamic enterprise environments where you're handling lots of data, you're dealing with lots of different stakeholders, lots of different use cases. How do you deploy AI agents to be autonomous in that kind of environment, where it might be much simpler if you just had one or two people who are using the agent? So anybody want to jump in on that one first?
I can take that from our side.
Sure.
I think the number one thing to figure out in an enterprise environment or even in a non-enterprise environment is kind of the boundary of your problem. Clearly, I think we have established that we don't have autonomous agents today where we can just say, hey, can you scale to just n different tasks? I think what we can start doing is, can you scale to the 15 tasks or the 20 tasks that I have? I think last year it was maybe somewhere between 1 to 3. I think now we have kind of, I would say, in the double digits today. So one of the key part about this is just, I would say, maybe product management or product solving around what exactly are those complex tasks that we want to do. And then can we design an agentic system just to solve that specific problem today? Getting that right, I think, can unlock a value very instantly in my mind. And that's kind of what we have seen with a bunch of our customers too.
Yeah, identifying and clearly defining use cases. I think great point. Who wants to jump in next?
Yeah, I think it's a great point. I was going to go straight to, like the sort of grammar of what we have, agents doing and using, and we're seeing some common sort of terms of art emerge. And agents use tools. So like a tool is something that where it interacts with the outside world. And agents have initial setup conditions and guiding prompts and everything like that. But I think Amaya is totally right. It's like the first step in building an agent is to have a problem that needs solving. And I think that we're very much at peak hype rate. Let's build an AI agent without really identifying, what it's going to do and understanding if that's valuable for people. And I think that's actually the very first place that probably every enterprise will be starting right now.
I'll add, if I may, one of the things I see is it's a kind of a classic problem where you see there's a huge amount of enthusiasm of these SDKs and tooling, the whole industry emerging around all these, the art of the possible. What I think a lot of people forget is what's actually the impact I'm trying to deliver, and how I'm actually going to build a narrative that's going to connect to the business and to what outcome I'm trying to get to, and what metric am I trying to adjust that will ultimately suggest that I am successful at that. I think that's the grounding I think many should seek. I think that's an important metric moving forward.
Yeah, and I guess the last thing I'll add, because I'm going to agree on all fronts that we have to have the use case first. Like, you got to start with value first versus the tech. But once you do that, one mindset that's been interesting and maybe helpful for our customers as they've gone to deploy these things is at a certain level of complexity, your agents need some of the same accesses that your real life employees need. So like anchor the agents in the reality of like what your employees are doing today. What systems do they need access to? What kind of permissions problems might there be associated with that? That can at least give you the contours of some of the things that you might need to orchestrate across the different agents that you have working together.
That I totally agree.
Yeah, excellent points. So one piece of this that's also very important is contextual memory. So especially in the enterprise context, one of the things that really gives AI agents such tremendous value, or at least potential for value, is this proprietary context, understanding the context of your business, and to the point you guys made of the particular use cases that you're trying to deploy it in. So how do you ensure that AI agents retain and retrieve the relevant context while also avoiding outdated or irrelevant information? Who wants to weigh in on that one?
I got a perspective on that. So I think one of the things we are seeing, at least from my perspective, is a kind of reframing of what is the kind of task and expectations of the data teams that we serve here in Relation. So often it's about moving them to a point whereby we need to permit them to frame not so much the data that they want to seek and find, but much more the business problem they're trying to seek and solve. So what we're seeing is this emergence of almost like a marketplace around a set of data products that are served by a set of agents. And ultimately, how do you kind of spin up a relevant and capable and immediately accessible marketplace for our customers? And agents are being seen as the means by which we can not only craft an experience whereby those who are seeking to solve these problems can ask these problems, but in the same vein, those who are tasked with getting data in that shape so that those answers can be met can be delivering that in an agentic way is really important. And ultimately, there's a flywheel where those who are tasked with producing these data products, those who are tasked with actually consuming those products to actually make business decisions can really benefit from that ongoing conversation that happens between these two cohorts. And I think that's going to be a huge unlock for many enterprises that we deal with on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah,
Very good points. Ryan?
Interesting question. The term you use, contextual memory, was those as two different things that are very important. Each are very important. I see those as two different things that are almost at odds with each other: context and memory. And absolutely, context is king right now. That's the secret to making agents and AI perform well generally. I think that the people building with this technology in the wild, that's sort of a rallying cry that I've heard before, where it's like these models are now intelligent enough. You just have to make sure they have the pertinent information to do their job properly. So what's happening right now is I guess there's two things. First is a tremendous race to getting really, really good at sort of context management, knowing what to tell the AI, at the right times, basically. And that's a very difficult technical problem. It's using a lot of old school sort of technology to sort of manage and index information in the right ways. And there's lots of different approaches, and we've come part of the way there with that. But I think that what really is important, what's coming next, is the memory part. And this is something that a lot of people are working on in research right now. This is actually sort of early days, and I suspect we'll probably reassemble a year from now, and we'll have our 2026 Data Science Connect session, and we'll be talking about memory next year. But the big thing is actually helping these models understand and retain information from an architecture perspective. And what we're doing right now, it's like you have this superhuman intelligence friend who's read every book ever written and knows every single math theorem and can write amazing code and all these things, but that friend is an amnesiac. It's like every time you talk to them, they can't remember the last conversation you had unless you tell them. And it's like, oh, last time we talked, you solved Riemann's hypothesis for me like this, and the person's like, oh, I did? Okay, well then let's do that with it. And it's funny because we've been sort of band-aiding over it, and what we really need are going to be the sort of next generation of models that can adapt and retain and learn how to sort of index that information on their own. And that's something I'm personally really excited about. I think that's probably what we're going to be hearing a lot about for the next sort of 6 to 12 months.
Yeah, excellent points. Amaya or Christian?
Yeah, I think maybe that we have had a few successes with a couple of approaches, similar to kind of what Ryan mentioned in terms of existing work, where you can use your existing metadata into knowledge graph, and then you can start getting good answers out of that. I think that caps out very quickly. You also need a very decent amount of a feedback loop into the system, and a lot of machine learning systems were solved in this manner. Two places I think where we have seen maybe a little bit more different approaches that are, I think, leading to success is actually fine tuning a model specifically for retrieving context and avoiding outdated information does help a lot more. And I think that's one place where having fine tuned model with the right metadata can actually make a reasonable difference. And then I think the part of the agentic AI there is getting whichever LLM you're using, whether that is Claude or ChatGPT, to work with your fine-tuned model to get the context correctly. And the second approach that I think we have been experimenting with, which has also shown promising results, is this notion of continual learning, which is, I think, a standard algorithmic primitive, and how to kind of tie that with to LLMs is where we have had a pretty high amount of success with right now with our existing customers.
Yeah, very good points. We want to get to our next question, which is the issue of reliability and predictability. So related to the problems of context that we were talking about, reliability and predictability is a critical component of trustworthy AI, and especially as we get into more advanced AI like agentic AI and using that to actually make decisions. All that on top of course, the well-known issue of hallucinations, particularly with LLMs. So what approaches can organizations, especially large enterprises, take to improve consistency and trustworthiness of agentic AI so that stakeholders buy into it and feel comfortable leveraging it as part of their jobs? Who wants to take that one?
Maybe I'll give my perspective just from seeing these things rolled out at different types of companies. And you have a lot of different stakeholders when you talk about trust. Can I trust the thing? The user wants to know, can I trust the thing? And the IT administrators want to know, can I trust the thing, in different ways. But what I liked was Ryan's mention of the closed loop system, because I think a big shift starts happening when you think about these as systems and not as just assistants. So that means instrumenting the systems. So logging the decisions and being able to monitor those things, evaluate your outcomes over time, especially as things change and as you might change out underlying models or as your context might change. So taking a systems approach is super helpful when you're actually setting the thing up. But then when you start talking about it actually meets reality, it meets the end users, and do they trust it? Do they actually use the thing you spent all the effort and time to build? Then you have to make sure that they trust the output in a different way. So what is the source? Did it pick the right source? Can I actually drill into this and verify it for myself? That kind of stuff ends up actually being super important and is more like user experience and human dynamics than like technical bits and bytes.
So Christian, you just gave me you said that my favorite word, trust. And what we are seeing is it's actually a little beyond trust. It's actually about trustworthiness, right? So trustworthiness is the kind of underlying foundation whereby we need to, and we are seeing our customers build towards, I've said it before, I'll say it again, the kind of more of a data productization and having a level of accountability and ownership that is the underpinnings on the context to which they are providing to these agents. And if you're able to, stand up the right level of governance, and by that I mean not governing everything, governing according to the through lines for the business outcomes that you are working towards. I see a moment whereby, that gives those who are consuming these agents, using these agents, and moving these agents more closer to critical customer use cases, have a deeper sense of what these are. And I think there's also a movement to allowing a much greater ecosystem within an enterprise users. So more technical, certainly technical users, but also less technical and knowledge worker users as well. So being able to package the sets of data provenance and data lineage around what is actually going into these things, I think is going to be really important as well. I think there's going to be a real spectrum of how that is packaged in a way so that it's consumable, so that people can say, okay, I know what I'm getting, I know what risk I'm adopting, and this ultimately will kind of move us closer towards having a ubiquitous use case, ubiquitous set of use cases that can be supported.
I think too is that I think in a lot of ways the question of reliability is actually a question of explainability. And now what I mean by that is that we have lots of models. We've discussed these are all great models, and things like human in the loop helps, and proper feedback loops for an LLM helps. And there's lots of different ways to increase the accuracy of responses coming out of an LLM. I think given the nature of the LLMs, there will always be responses that don't meet the question that was being asked, because it's like a poorly formed question that you're asking on one side. And so I don't think any LLM will ever be 100% accurate. I think that's okay though, and I think that no human is 100% accurate either, for that matter. I think what bridges the gap though is making it clear what the LLM is doing, and that can be done several ways. But it's like if there's a middleware layer that actually sort of explains the LLM's actions, and it's a little bit like how people have there's tremendous adoption of code generation with LLMs because the people that use it understand the code and they can review the code that's writing. The closest example I can think of is like that old story about the elevator. At the dawn of the elevator, people said it went too slow, and the solution wasn't to speed up the elevator; it was to add those little indicators at the top of what floor you're at. And then everyone kind of understood, and then they had more clarity into the process, and that seemed to resolve their concerns. And I think there's a lot of parallels with that, and reliability and making people understand what the LLM's doing as well.
Great points. Am I anything other?
Yeah, I think from my perspective, I think the number one thing that I think, as Ryan said, is just around explainability about the LLMs. I think when DeepSeek came out with the thinking mode, where people could see how LLMs are thinking, I think that was a step change in how people started interpreting the output of LLMs. I think more of those user experiences are kind of necessary. So I think of this as partly a productive problem. I think one of the things that has also happened with maybe the hype is people have started using LLMs to judge LLMs itself, which I think initially gave very promising results, but I don't think was necessarily the best way to solve the problem. I think the best way to, or the best successes we have had, is to actually model this as a co-agency problem, because it's a human who's effectively not able to trust or not able to see the consistency of it. So how do you leverage humans itself, not in a human in the loop manner, but to be precise, kind of even from a quality assurance standpoint? I think we can use LLMs to seed what would be a good evaluation set. And I think over time, a lot of enterprises have had a lot of QA, whether that is QA engineers or QA systems build out. And how do you connect your evaluation sets to those systems can unlock a large value, because then those people can evaluate very quickly. They have a very good sense of what is right, what is wrong, and they can kind of be a first level of approval in the sense of, hey, this model for our use case does work well, and we can feel fairly confident putting it in front of business users. So I would think of this problem as, how do we accelerate the existing talent that's already there who's evaluating such systems, and think about it from that standpoint in every enterprise.
Yeah, very good points. And I think viewing the agent as another member of your team, right, and understanding its capabilities and limitations, and of course the training and talent component of this is, it underlies everything. You can't, if your workforce is not prepared, then it's difficult to effectively leverage the technology. So definitely excellent points there.
That's actually a point too, which is something we've really observed, is that even for some, LLMs are an incredibly accessible tool. You just start typing in questions, but both for our own platform, but also just LLM usage in general, you see a wide range of outcomes based on how well people know how to ask the right questions and use it. Still, there's still skill with learning how to use an LLM, and it's like I always tell people that instead of asking ChatGPT for an answer, I always say, hey, this is what I'm thinking about. What questions would you ask me about this first before you give me an answer on it? And that always improves the quality of responses. And there's a bit of an art to it still that needs to be mastered. So training is an essential part of basically what we're talking about with reliability and trust as well.
Absolutely. And to the point about trustworthiness and explainability, in an enterprise context, of course, for many years, real-time data for certain use cases has been critical, and that's always been a question for certain types of use cases, is how do you get real-time data? What are the challenges associated with that? What are the requirements associated with that? But this takes on a new flavor with AI agents, where maybe you're leveraging data for new use cases in a different context than maybe was originally envisioned. And in some instances, that data needs to be real time. If people are relying on it, they're leveraging an agent for certain use cases, they may need real time or nearly real time data in order to effectively trust what they're getting from the agent. So how do you manage that, particularly in an enterprise context? Both identifying those use cases of, do we need real time? How good is real time? How frequent do those pushes need to come? And then how do you appropriately caution folks if you can't have real time data, and then also what kind of infrastructure requirements are necessary? So there's a lot to unpack there, but what are sort of the real time needs in the context of agents that may be similar or different to other real time use cases?
I think one of the key things when it comes to real time is just separating out your scenarios from operational, analytical, and critical uh, use cases. I would be very skeptical of letting LLMs run anything on critical workflows today. Whether, if the decision is non-deterministic, if you make critical decisions non-deterministic, you kind of just set yourself up for failure. I think a lot of success we have seen right now is, I would say, in the analytical scenarios where people can get question answers I think of those as like analytical by and large, whether those are from documents or from databases or tables or any of that nature. I think operational is where we are heading in the current world. And I think for operational, there's this term that we internally use, which is agentic retrievers, where you want to be able to retrieve the correct data pretty much very, very quickly. And I think that's kind of why also MCP servers have taken off, because they allow you to do real-time retrieval in an agentic manner or in an LLM first manner. So one of, I think, the key things that people are going to eventually, I think, start asking themselves is whether that is an MCP server or something else, is what part of my systems can become an MCP server or can become an AI first server. I think as soon as you do that unlocking, then you have AI clients who can talk to them and they can kind of reason through each other. And that's kind of your first step in terms of infrastructure to enable within your organization. Like, how do you become AI first, whether that's via MCP, A2A, or kind of anything else as a protocol?
I agree. My first to that is, I mean, there's two things. There's real time and there's adaptability. And I think for real time data, I don't think that the bottleneck there is the LLM or is the AI agent. I think it's actually the hard part there is getting all of the supporting data systems to work in real time, and that's there's a level of sophistication there that's more challenging than running batch. And then when I go back to that, it's like how fast do we make it? It's like as fast as you need to consume it. So, but I think that an LLM can keep up with the pace of data better than your large scale real time data systems can. That's the real hard part about that. But I think that comes down to the adaptability part. And I remember, in the land before time, when I was going to data science school, there's this module that they teach you where you solve Pac-Man with reinforcement learning. And it's really cool. You get a Pac-Man map and you set up a little RL bot to learn how to play Pac-Man, and you let it run 100 million times or whatever. And there's kind of a competition to see who can make the best one. And pretty much everyone succeeds in making like this like superhuman Pac-Man that just like instant reflexes and just destroys the map. And then they say, okay, let's do something, and they delete one little wall of the map and they change the map structure. And suddenly all of our superhuman Pac-Mans are just like back to square one, and they all are like terrible. It's like, actually being Pac-Man again. And the lesson that you learn from that, is that RL, it's hard to make it generalize, and adaptability and generalization is kind of the same thing. That was 2017. So the land before time. But the neat thing is that, that's starting to, I'd say that the right approach for adaptability is probably just to wait. I think it's solving itself. And we're seeing better generalization just happen before our eyes as the underlying foundation tech gets better and better. And it's like, a year ago, if you asked a model how many R's there are in strawberry, it would just pick the last time anybody asked how many R's, like just ask the question that counts stuff, and it would say 2 and get it wrong. But now if you ask that, it gets it right and it says 3. And that is interestingly a generalization problem. That's an adaptability problem. And I just think as we continue to advance, the models will get better and better at sort of that out of domain problem set, and they're already quite good at it now. And I think it'll solve itself.
Great points. Jonathan and Christian? Yeah, there.
Yeah, the one thing I'll say is like you've probably tried to solve real-time data issues for other parts of your workflow as well. And to the extent that you can lay agentic things on top of that, you should. So if you have data infrastructure that's set up to do things with real-time data and you have the ability to use the platform, that's what it's kind of Data IQ's whole angle is, the platform, everything's all together. So you just kind of layer agents in there. It uses that infrastructure you've already put in place, and you don't have to like resolve the problem. That's been helpful for our customers at least.
Great points. So I want to get to a different question around sort of the implications of once we start with more widespread use of agentic AI. It raises a whole new range of security and compliance questions that maybe weren't as present before. So how can enterprises enforce security and compliance while deploying autonomous AI agents? Obviously, governance is a key piece of that puzzle, but how does your governance, how do those governance practices change in the context of AI agents relative to what organizations may already have in place?
I have an opinion on this one. So I think I think governance is obviously the key word here. How can enterprises gear up such that they can come up with an effectively sustainable and deployable governance model? What I am seeing is the notion of data mesh. So driving a degree of accountability in a federated fashion across the businesses, such that there's a degree of ownership of the data that people are considering, to provide that context to these next generation set of capabilities and agentic kind of outcomes that they're working towards. I think it's about making sure that the right level of policies and controls are enforced centrally, and that accountability is measured in that federated form. But giving people, enough rope to run with, such that you're not necessarily going to squander the innovation and the excitement and all the kind of outcomes people are striving towards as well. Having the right level of governance is really key, and I think this is an evolution. From certainly from what I see from the customers I work with, but I'd also kind of cite some of the kind of commentary we see from the likes of Gartner, who are saying rightly that governance needs to be that much more targeted, not necessarily trying to boil the ocean. I think governance programs have had a bit of a bad name, whereby people don't quite know why we're doing this. But I think increasingly what we're seeing is that kind of introducing the right amount of governance that you can stay within the bounds of compliance and regulatory concerns, particularly in banking, pharmaceutical, insurance type industries, but in the same vein, making sure that there's still enough room for maneuver for the innovations to happen, particularly to kind of drive these new agentic scenarios.
Points. Who else wants to weigh in on that one?
I think it's a like most security issues, and I think that I think the solution to good security is good systems architecture in a lot of products. I think that AI has its own sort of distinct needs, but I think that still remains true, that it's about designing carefully for security from the ground up, basically. And we all work in data. We all know the importance of good governance and good security for all of the companies we work with. But I can give you one example of that, for instance, that I think is sort of unique to LLMs is V0 of LLM data retrieval was text to SQL, right? You hook an LLM to a data warehouse, you just have it write SQL, and there's a lot of governance concerns when you give this giant random number generator, the ability to query a warehouse unfettered, and there's a high surface area there for vulnerabilities. And I think now sort of, the next version of that, which has become sort of the state of the art with several people, is going through a semantic layer, right? And the semantic layer handles that governance, and it also provides separation between the LLM and the data warehouse. So in that case, when the LLM is trying to answer a question, at no point in time do they get to write a query directly to the warehouse. They're only talking in primitives that are, that are sandboxed basically and governed. And then the semantic layer itself goes and prepares and executes that query using traditional technology. So I guess just the act of adding that in and building that into the system from the ground, greatly reduces the surface area of risk, and solves a lot of the issues we've been talking about with LLMs and unpredictability, and all the things that make LLMs useful as well also add those additional complexities.
I think, Ryan, if I can react to that quickly, you are right. I think that kind of abstraction, that obfuscation is really key at a semantic layer. I'm also seeing the emergence of almost maybe a resurgence of the notions of data contracts, right? So having a data contract underlying this is a really important piece of glue, such that the agents who are bringing this data into their runtime, they have a good sense of what they're getting, what it says on the tin, but there's a degree of that's the way in which you can make it that reliability and the trustworthiness of that data. That's really key, I feel. Now, of course, the data contract is an entirely other debate itself, but I don't think we have time for that. Just you nodding around.
Yeah, and Jonathan, I liked your mention earlier about the fact that there's different levels. You don't need the same sledgehammer for every kind of approach. That's actually one of the reasons that we've built things in our platform to help customers kind of start with those controls in place at the right level. So not all of them need the same level of rigor. You might have a set of templates for this is how this project should go, and this is the type of LLM you should use for this type of use case and what type of data access it should have. It just makes me think about the idea that like smooth is fast. If you can set up the guardrails in a way that they're able to create what they need, but it still is a smooth path to deployment and a smooth path to monitoring, it makes it a little bit simpler. You're always going to have edge cases, but you probably have solved this problem generally. Again, I'll say elsewhere in your workflows and elsewhere in your organization around how you can use your data. So anytime you can just like tap into that with your agentic stuff and not reinvent it, it's really useful.
I think smooth and fast is a great way to think about it. I don't think any of us, certainly the enterprise, can operate in a meta-like world of move fast to break things. That is completely the wrong way to approach this, and all it does is undermine the viability and the outcomes that everyone's striving for here.
I think maybe lastly, I'll add, I think security and compliance is more of a non-AI problem. I think, as Ryan mentioned, if we design good systems and in a sound manner, it should hopefully work. I take the contrarian view that I think the semantic layer and data contracts, I think, are not going to be that important in an AI first world, or specifically for like enterprising enforcing security and compliance, especially with things like Google launched with agent to agent communication protocol, where two companies are talking to each other. Now the security problem is actually even more harder, and privacy problem is even more harder. Uh, just two organizations trying to enforce data contracts or kind of trying to get semantic layer is going to create more or less religious wars, is my take. I think this is going to get solved in a different manner than what maybe we have done so far. Uh, there will be a huge class of just net new privacy research and work that has not been figured out yet, which I think is going to happen. A key part that I think happened over the last year is this notion of unlearning, where you can make an LLM unlearn before you kind of maybe send to the user, and unlearning can then decode the information that you want to present rather than necessarily just giving the entire context on that front. So I think there's a lot of just state of the art work that hasn't happened yet for this problem. And I think by retrofitting some of the existing work that has successfully happened for big data, we are just going to delay the return of investment of AI. We rather probably focus on uh, just getting good outcomes out of it and guard security and compliance with maybe a more policy and human based manner today, until people kind of figure out how to do that in a more systemic way over the next few years.
And I think that tees up nicely our next question, which is about scale. So, you raise a good point that identifying, especially at the stage we're at right now, identifying some limited use cases, demonstrating success on those use cases before you start sort of rolling out all these other things that maybe become more necessary at scale or further down the road. But how can organizations start thinking about scale in terms of agentic AI? What are sort of the cost and complexity concerns that need to be evaluated, and what things need to be done maybe today, and what things can wait until you start rolling out more and more use cases across the organization? How should enterprises today and in the next couple of years be thinking about scale of agentic AI?
I think I think of scale on two dimensions at least, and these are the two dimensions that I personally deeply care about. One is the latency that an agentic AI takes to take a decision. And I think if you make it too complex of an agentic AI architecture where you have, I don't know, 20, 30 agents working together, it's just going to be slow no matter what. It's also going to make cost prohibitive over time, even if you use open source models, just kind of operationalizing that. So keep it simple is, I think, a good fundamental idea. And especially with models getting better and better, you kind of need to take a little bit of a bet here, where today, if there is a model that doesn't do well, but it does maybe well 30% of it, a year from now, that 30% is going to become 80%. And the entire piece of maybe effort as an investment that you did might become redundant or kind of irrelevant. So keeping it simple and bounded, I think, to the problem is important. And maybe the hot take that I would give is, don't use a framework. That is one way to keep your life simple and ensure that the systems that you're building are kind of well controlled, and that can ensure scale going around. And when it comes to problem solving, right, like if we just take a look at the successes where AI has really shown massive results, one is around programming, the other I think is largely, I would say, around maybe legal bookkeeping and financial bookkeeping. Those are well-defined problems with also well-defined way to evaluate them. And that's why I think they are working. But something like healthcare is going to be very finicky and hard for people to get right, even with bookkeeping. So we need to be, that's just the work that somebody needs to do before the problem itself is set up. Do we know what well-defined success looks like? I think if you know that, then scaling becomes an easier problem to solve.
Very good points. Other thoughts on that one?
I'm a big fan of, I've been a product manager practitioner for many years in a former life. I'm very much a fan of the PRFAQ methodology, right? I have a very stated set of outcomes written as a press release. What do we want to be able to say? What's the narrative we want to be able to illustrate as a function of this has been a success for us? I think that is a great place to it's a great arc to have, and then working back from there can then inform exactly what you need to do and what you want to do to kind of meet the outcomes that you have, formally stated. I think cost controls, I think, are really important. I think, I'm just looking at the chat here as well. I think having a very concrete sense of your AI readiness is something we hear a ton about, right? And AI readiness comes in all shapes and forms. It's sometimes described, and I think, Ryan, I'm going to credit you for some really great stories. One of the stories I have heard that I'll share is that in some sense, some of the enterprises that I talk to feel like they've got stuck in a frat party that they can't get out of. And someone left at the AI punch bowl too late and everyone's drunk and no one knows what's going on. So how do you actually bring some sense to this? So, what we are seeing is the emergence of, practices, different organizational sort of responsibilities around data product managers, data stewards, married with the level of governance around this, such that they can be very, very focused on the what they want to see here as well. And I totally agree with you. The more non-deterministic outcomes we are seeing in healthcare, I think hold the greatest of the promise, right? But actually has the greatest sense of risk of how actually can you measure the impact, because you're measuring patient impact and patient outcome differentials. So I think it's going to be really, really difficult, but I think therein lies the promise. But I think very deep pockets will be required to get to those kind of outcomes that I think we would all hope to see down the line.
Is because models are actually pretty cost effective, and going down by an order of magnitude every year, pretty much, and we're kind of it seems like we're kind of racing towards that, intelligence too cheap to meter kind of stage. And, as someone whose customers make a lot of AI queries, and we just put the bill for it, we feel like the costs changing almost month to month, basically, as we operate. And, we don't worry about the cost of that intelligence as a provider of it. So I think that internally, even for a large enterprise, I think it can be it can be very managed, and especially as costs continue to decrease. Complexity, though, is another story. And the reason complexity is hard is because the more things that you try and have an agent do, it actually becomes exponentially harder to do them all well. And, like if I go back to data science school, for example, we were trying to identify if there's a cat in a picture, right? And that was like one of the problem. And we kind of got good at that 10 years ago. But then the next step was like, what animal is in this picture? Is it a cat or a dog or a deer? And that was harder. And now we're in the general case where it's like, describe this picture. And that is, a significantly harder problem to get right than is there a cat? And that's true for, if you're trying to build agents inside an enterprise as well. If you try and have it do 20 different tasks really well, then, that's going to be a lot harder than having it do one thing well. A good example of that, actually, to Amai's point about MCP, is that like we don't know what the real limit is, but people are saying there's kind of a functional limit of like 20 MCP servers before they start to get confused with each other and things like that. So, scaling up complexity is hard. And I think the solution to that, the approach then, is to avoid the generalist one size fits all, agent for an org, and focus again on the problems and focus on task specific problems. So, if you're trying to build something that manages manages your ERP systems or something like that, that can be a completely separate domain, a completely separate problem that you're solving from the marketing copywriting agent or whatever, and just let those be separate entities, and you don't have that exponential increase in difficulty as that agent scales in complexity.
Yeah, I was actually probably going to say at the end of that, something similar to the fact that, like, again, going back to, you can make corollaries to systems that we already understand. One of them is an organization is a group of humans, and you wouldn't expect one human to do everything in the organization past maybe if you're a solopreneur or something, right? Like, and even then, you probably want some help if you're a solopreneur. Agents, similarly, like if you can make sure they're able to niche down and you give them the bounds to do that well, then the trick becomes orchestrating them so that the outcome is still what you would expect. So the orchestration and the multi-agent orchestration is a really interesting area right now that I'm looking at as well. And a lot of our customers are trying to solve this in a good way. Is, okay, we've got this agent that works pretty well. We've got these other Gen AI applications. We're going to do more agents. How do we orchestrate them to a good effect?
And that's going to bring us to the next branch of governance, Christian, I feel, for how then you could understand and mesh all these together. I think that's an exciting prospect.
Absolutely. Well, yeah, and I'll let you guys, we're running tight on time, but we did have one more question planned before the lightning round. So if anyone wants to quickly weigh in on this one in light of that last answer, how do you implement governance and oversight mechanisms to prevent AI agents from making unintended or harmful decisions? Jonathan, did you have anything you wanted to add there?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's something we've all heard before. It's the garbage in, garbage out discussion, right? I think from my perspective, I think the enterprise data catalogs have a very important role to play here in having providing a canonical model to level the playing field, to provide the ability to apply a set of concrete set of governance policies and enforcement, built also around a set of data quality, and with the right kind of lenses, such that those that are charged with pumping data into these models can get a keen sense of the lineage and data provenance going through these things, all of which I think kind of suggest to having a more trustworthy kind of foundation for all of this. I think that is really, really key. But I think it's not singularly going to be a set of technologies. It's something that I have seen work well only when there's a commitment around technology, people and processes as well, but done so in a way that is not necessarily a heavy-handed top-down orchestration, but is something that allows people to sort of move forward in a more concerted data mesh federated type environment. So.
Excellent points. Well, we've got a couple of minutes left, so I want to get to our lightning round. So in one phrase or a couple, if each of you could give your top piece of advice for enterprises that are looking to implement agentic AI. So I'll go in the opposite order that we did intros, I think, at the beginning. So Amai, why don't you kick us off on that one?
I'd say look at co-agency as like one of the first things to use. I think human in the loop is a necessary thing, especially for operational use cases.
Absolutely. Jonathan?
For me, it's trustworthiness, right? It's all about trust. Are you operating and deploying these agents who are working with other agents in a manner that is built on top of a trustworthy basis and foundation? That's what it's all about.
Very good point, Ryan.
I would say start small and take caution. Start with problem. Know what success looks like. Try and solve this with just the basic foundation model. Can you do this in ChatGPT instead of having to go and build a bunch of custom stuff? If so, then just do that. Don't try and boil the ocean for the start. Just find problems and solve them.
Absolutely. And Christian, we'll give you the last word.
Given that all the good ones are taken, I'll just add that you should also make sure that you, as I've mentioned on a couple of my other answers, just don't reinvent the wheel on things. Like, don't make it more complex than it has to be. You've probably solved a lot of these problems once you go to like build and implement and deploy this. You've probably solved a lot of these problems elsewhere. You've solved it with human resources and people management. You've solved it with security and compliance and governance and other areas. So see if you can just layer on top of that as much as possible.
Absolutely. Great points all around. And thank you all for a great discussion. If you guys missed any of the webinar today or want to rewatch anything, the recording will be available just a few minutes after the webinar. If you refresh this page, we'll also send out a link to the YouTube video tomorrow morning if you'd like to rewatch it. I want to say a special thank you again to all of our panelists here today, as well as our partners who made this webinar possible: Zenlytic, Alation, Nexla, Dataiku, Informatica, Galileo, and SAP. So thank you all, and we'll see you again next time. Have a good one. Thanks, guys.